Housekeeping things really quickly. First of all, don't forget that your paper, and many of you have already given them to me, but don't forget that your paper's due by midnight tonight. So just get it to me in PDF format.
Midnight?
And thank
Midnight?
you. Yeah, midnight is fine.
Midnight? Okay.
Midnight. Well, like 11:59.
11:50. Can't do.
Yeah. I won't actually check till tomorrow morning. So
Okay.
yeah. So the second thing, and I hope this is okay for everybody. I would like to move your test from next Friday to the 19th, which is the following week. Is that okay? Oh, okay. All right. Wow. Well, you guys are easy. Okay. So anyway, that'll be on Wednesday the 19th. So it'd be a little odd to have a Wednesday test, but hopefully that'll all work out okay. And I will get a study guide to you sometime. I'll try and get a study guide to you sometime this weekend for that. So if for some reason, and I realize there was obviously popular support from that for that, but if for some reason that doesn't work for you, that's my fault, not yours. So just let me know, and we'll figure something out. So, okay, good. Thanks, guys. All right. So I'd like to turn, if you don't mind, let's turn to page 135. And if someone would volunteer to read, where we get these two great documents, one just simply entitled America, and the other Thomas Jefferson's explanation for the Declaration. So anybody want to volunteer? That'd be great. Thank you. So fellow countrymen.
Fellow countrymen, be not intimidated at the sight of soldiers, mercenary soldiers, who, for a penny a day, addition to their wages, would serve Mustafa III as soon as George III. You know their number. 1,000 slaves are not to give laws to a brave and free people. They have already begun to show their insolence. There is now no appeal but to God. Extirpate them root and branch. Be sure their chiefs are the first victims. Rise, my countrymen. Throw off the first fetter of slavery, a standing army. Remember your brave forefathers, men of whom the world was not worthy. They purchased this land with much treasure and seas of their blood. Let them not in this day rise up and see their posterity less brave, less resolute, and less virtuous. My countrymen, we either must unsheathe our swords or be slaves. Your understandings would be affronted were the last to be put to you. The day has come. Strike these invaders of your liberty, these enemies of your God, and not let them any longer pollute this insulum sacrum. Ye that have got no words, sell your garments and buy one. You fear not death, only slavery. The anniversary of our last stroke to their underhand plots was the 14th August. Let our last and effectual stroke to their open hostilities be the same. My countrymen, be freemen or slaves or die.
Okay, good. Thank you. Nicely read. So I have to give you guys just a little bit of a story about this. When I was in graduate school, and I wrote my dissertation on the founding, or at least an aspect of the founding, and I'd never been to Hillsdale at that point. I was at Indiana University then when I was working on my dissertation, and I drove up to Ann Arbor, to the University of Michigan, to go through what they have called the William Clements Library there, and it's an archive and a very nice one. And I started going through a bunch of British letters that had been captured. That is, these were actually John Adams's letters to his wife, Abigail, that had been captured, and the British had held them, and John had written them, but Abigail had never seen them. And that was amazing in and of itself to be reading, and they were these beautiful love letters, just stunning love letters, about how much John missed Abigail, but then he would mix in all these great intellectual ideas as well. And you could really tell that they had just a fantastic relationship. But these had all been intercepted. They'd been captured. And I found this piece that we have in here and put into the reader. I found this on a parchment. So it was stuck within a letter, and it was meant to be a kind of poster. And it had all kinds of weird symbols on it. I don't know what they meant. And this was back, this would have been about 1995, so long before digital cameras and before I could take a camera into an archive. So I just wrote down what I could. But I've always loved this whole notion of what does it mean to be free, and notice the kind of argument that was made. So here's a poster. This is the kind of thing you would have hung on what they would have called a liberty tree or a liberty pole, in which they're arguing back and forth. And you notice here in this, not only is there an excellent reference to God and to everything that's sacred, but there's also that absolute dedication to our ancestors. Think about what they did, how much blood they gave to purchase this land. And so what are you going to do? How can you prove yourself? And there's really no alternative. You either are a freeman or you're a slave. And if you have no other choice, that is, if you're about to become a slave, it is far better to die. So the freeman is the highest thing. The slave is the lowest thing. But death is preferable to being a slave. And that idea, I want you to hold on to for a very long time. Because that's something, and when we get close to spring break, I think I told you guys we're going to go out to the cemetery for a class. And we're going to talk about some of the things that we have happening in the American Civil War. But one of the great arguments, and one of the things that really motivates people during the American Civil War, especially those from the North, is this idea that you have to be willing to show yourself as being worthy of what your ancestors had earned for you. And that is so strong in here, in the way that this broadside is presenting it. And did you catch who is George III? How should we think of him? I love the way that he puts this. So, everybody see the name that was given to him? Who's Mephistopheles? It's the devil, right? So you can either basically lay claim to the king, or you can to the devil, right? That's it. That's your really only. Those are your choices if you're not going to be fighting with this. So it's a very rousing speech in terms of trying to get people to fight and to go along with this. But then we have the second thing, written much later. So that poster was written during the war itself, the one we just read. But now we jump forward 50 years. We get up to 1825, and we have Robert E. Lee's father, Lighthorse Henry Lee, writing to Thomas Jefferson and asking him, and Jefferson's a year away from dying at this point, not that anybody knows that, but he's only a year away. And Henry Lee writes him and says, can you explain to me what is the meaning of the Declaration? Why did you write this thing? So was it something that you just came up with off the top of your head? All right, would you mind reading a little more? That'd be great. Thank you.
With respect to our rights and the acts of the British government contravening those rights, there was but one opinion on this side of the water. All American Whigs thought alike on these subjects. When forced, therefore, to resort to arms for redress, an appeal to the tribunal of the world was deemed proper for a justification. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments, never before thought of, not merely to say things which have never been said before, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent, and to justify ourselves in the independent stand we are compelled to take, neither aiming at originality of principle or sentiment, nor yet copied from any particular and previous writing. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind, and to give to that expression the proper tone and spirit called for by the occasion. All its authority rests on the harmonizing sentiments of the day, whether expressed in conversation, in letters, printed essays, or in the elementary books of public right, as Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney.
Excellent. Thank you. So a lot's going on in this, and Jefferson is basically explaining we've got to find the common sense of the subject. So imagine if the Declaration was the most innovative document ever written. If that would be the case, it really could not have expressed the American mind. It can't be that innovative. It has to be synthetic in the way that it combines everything that had come before it. And Jefferson admits as much. You can say I wrote this, but in reality, all I did was take the ideas that were circulating and I gave them voice. So if there's anything new in the Declaration, it's simply that these things had never been said before exactly in the same way that we are saying them here. But all of this is traditional. And if we want to find where all of these come from, well, basically, you guys think about Western heritage, well, what did we have? We had Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. Now, none of you have read Sidney, most likely. He's one of the more obscure figures in all of this. But certainly, you read Aristotle and Cicero and Locke. And we realize this is what people are reading. So, at the time of the founding, there were only about 5,000 separate titles of books in the American colonies. So there were a lot more than 5,000 books. But if you took all the titles, the separate titles in America, there were only about 5,000. And printing presses are relatively cheap. Pulp is relatively cheap because you've got forests everywhere. So you can have a pretty good printing industry, but it won't be until after the American Revolution that we start seeing the rise of public libraries. So these books that are there are often sold privately, and they're in small collections, and then there are a few major collections. But you can imagine, if you're a really well-educated person, if you are Thomas Jefferson, or if you are John Adams or John Dickinson, you could easily get through the entire list of books that existed in what would become the United States 3 or 4 times during your lifetime. It would be easy. And it means that unlike us, when we walk into a Barnes & Noble, and I love Barnes & Noble, but when we walk in and we're just overwhelmed by the numbers of books that are there and the numbers of books that are coming out every week. We just have the tables of new books, and it's amazing. But when we look back then, we have just roughly 5,000 books that shape the ideas of the Americans. And that's why we can have something like Cato, a Tragedy be so representative, because it too ties together all of these ideas. And that's what the Declaration is. The Declaration is an argument, but tying together all the ideas that people had already agreed to in America. So we have to kind of figure out then, and this is the hard part. So remember, the Americans are very, very open. They're very earnest. They don't hide things in their documents. They're straightforward. So Jefferson, again, these are the ideas of Aristotle, Cicero, Locke, and Sidney. We still have to figure out, well, what was it that was common to them? So if they had this common mind, how did they put those ideas together? So it's one thing to say that we read from Aristotle and that we read from Cicero. But what part of Aristotle and what part of Cicero? And why Aristotle and not Plato? Why Cicero and not Caesar? What is it about these figures that matters to the American mind? And so, of course, we all know that the Americans are creating a republic. And we know that the republic itself, which is very much derives from the Latin res publica, this idea of a public good or the public thing. Anybody here ever been to Iceland? Kind of a random question, but it'll make sense. Anyone know what their parliament is called in Iceland? It's the oldest parliament in Europe. It's just called the Thing. Right? It means the republic. It's the same thing, the thing. I bet you would say ting in the Icelandic. So it's the public thing. And that idea of, well, what does this all come together? We have to imagine then, what does it mean to be in a republic? What does it mean to be a citizen of a republic? And so there are 4 things that we can identify in the American founding that really do bring together this idea of living in a republic. Number 1, most important thing by far, we must have a people who believe in virtue. Right? We have to have virtue. Now, we're never in any way, shape, or form ever going to have a society in which every person is virtuous. That's fairyland. That's not going to happen. In fact, even in fairyland, that wouldn't happen. The possibility that everybody is virtuous is just a pipe dream. But you can always imagine that there are enough people who are virtuous who will allow a society to flourish. And this means, and these guys believe very strongly in free will, this means that what do you do when you have this free will or you engage this free will? You use it to serve others. You serve the public good. This can never, ever be mandatory. If it's ever mandatory, if there's ever a law that forces you to do good, automatically that law is a heinous law because it doesn't reflect the norms of the culture. You have to freely choose the good for it to be good. And most of us won't do that. Not all the time. We won't live a life of public service for the most part. There are always exceptions, but they are truly exceptions. They are not the norm. So virtue, and here we have the classic virtues, prudence, justice, temperance, fortitude, and then the Christian virtues of faith, hope, and love. What we have as the 7 virtues, these are what the founders recognized as a necessity. Now, one of the things that I think we, especially in the 21st century, get a little frustrated about, we look back at the founding, and especially at a place like Hillsdale, we want the founding to kind of represent our conservative and libertarian ideals. And it does, but not necessarily in the way that we think. So it is perfectly permissible, absolutely permissible, and in fact quite natural to pursue your own self-interest. So the founders are not wacky about this. They're not trying to stop self-interest like the French are going to try and do during their revolution. They're not trying to get rid of that. But their argument is this. If, for example, Devin, and forgive me, but Devin's right in front of me, if Devin wants to pursue his own self-interest, and that means he wants to be an entrepreneur, and he wants to go out and he wants to make money, that's totally normal. It's a normal thing. But that doesn't mean we praise him as the highest person in society. He may be a necessary good, but that's not the highest. The highest would be when Devin, and I now can say this absolutely about Devin, when Devin served as a Marine. And of course, once a Marine, always a Marine.
Yacht?
Yeah. I mean, this is it, right? This is that service. That is exactly what the founders demanded. Nobody forced him to. He became a Marine on his own, like your dad. And I mean, these things really matter. So it's not that somehow the banker of the United States is a lesser person. But we can say that the person who sacrificed part of their life for the good of the public has a higher status in terms of us respecting them. So they both are equal citizens. They both get the right to vote. They both have all of this. But pursuit of avarice or pursuit of one's self-interest, while natural, is not great. So it's a good and important thing, but it's not a great thing like serving your country. That is a great thing. And that's why one of the things, did you guys catch as we had this lovely reading of the poster? What's the greatest tyranny that there is? Anybody catch that? There is no greater tyranny than what? A standing army. There's no greater tyranny. It's got to be a volunteer force. If we're drafting people, we've automatically admitted we've failed as a society. A draft is the surest sign you no longer exist as a coherent civilization. The draft takes away your choice to serve your country. And I know some of you were at the CCA, but one of my favorite moments in American history is during the War of 1812, when Andrew Jackson, who is by far our best military leader in the War of 1812, tells his men, if any one of you is here because of a levy, or because you were drafted, or because you think you're supposed to be here because some authority told you, I want you to leave now. You will not serve under me. You only serve under me if you have volunteered to be here, and if you truly believe in the cause. If you have not volunteered to be on this battlefield with me, you have no idea what we're fighting for. You can't. You've already ruined it, so get out. Right? That's Jackson. And that's a powerful argument in trying to understand who and what we are as a Republican people. So this virtue is not some kind of half-hearted virtue. They mean this fully. They just know that most of society won't be run by that. Most of society will be trying to figure out how to make a dollar here or there. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's not the highest thing. And virtue demands that we have at least a segment of society that can practice what they do best, whatever it may be, that they can practice that for the common good, for what is truly good, for all, and for the republic itself. So this is one of the hardest things about a republic, and you should have got this from reading Cato. I think, and I'm speaking here as Brad more than Professor Berzer, but I think a republic is the finest form of government that's ever existed. I think it's the best form of government that can exist in this world. It's also the form of government that actually demands the most of its citizens. And that's a bit of a paradox, that we can believe in almost complete liberty, and yet the only way to attain that liberty is for some to sacrifice themselves for everyone else. And so for those of us, for example, who might be bankers, or we might be merchants, those of us who spend our lives, the majority of us, who spend our lives pursuing money, this is okay. There's nothing wrong with that as long as it's honest. I totally fine. But we give space to those who serve to allow them to serve. That's the point. For those who are not at the top of virtue, they allow for the space to exist for the virtuous to serve. Right? That matters. Now, again, it's got to be voluntary. Otherwise, your society is kind of bunk, frankly. If it's not, you haven't been able to persuade people to do what's right. You guys should know this, and we're going to talk more about this in class. But here at Hillsdale is something, because I'm not a Hillsdale grad, even though I've been teaching here 21 years, I will never, ever live up to what you get as students here. But on the first day that Abraham Lincoln called up troops in 1861, almost every single male at this college volunteered. That did not happen anywhere else in the North, only at Hillsdale. And that is virtue in every way. And most of those guys died on the first and second days of Gettysburg. So we lost an entire generation of Hillsdale students in Pennsylvania. That's incredible. But that's the kind of sacrifice that is absolutely necessary for a free society to work. And there's the paradox, right? To be free, there has to be this kind of sacrifice that goes with it. So the second thing, not surprisingly, for a republic is that its citizens, and sometimes this means all citizens, sometimes this means male citizens, but citizens must be willing to bear arms. And this is not just some contingent thing based upon the American founding. As you guys already know, looking at the Puritans and others, manhood is defined by your willingness to defend what you consider to be sacred. And you can only do that by being armed. And that we see that enshrined in the Second Amendment. And I'm not an NRA member, I'm not a gun nut. I respect them. I grew up with them in Kansas. Yeah, you're kind of boring with a pistol. But it's everywhere. But regardless, forget the politics of the present day. It was fundamental to define your personhood, that you would be willing to defend what you believe to be sacred, no matter the cost. And that can have a downside, of course. You can have a very violent society in certain places. There were times in the South that was very, very violent. There were times in the American West that could be very violent. But overall, it actually created a fairly peaceful society, in large part because you knew everybody was, it's like, just think about today, the stupidest thing you could do in America would be to commit a crime in Texas, especially in public. I mean, you're done. You're going to have 5 guys, 6 guys, and not just guys, women. I mean, they're going to be shooting at you. You're done. Massachusetts, nobody's going to be able to shoot you, if you're doing something wrong. Nobody. Nobody's armed. Nobody believes in it. The culture matters. And Texas still has what the founding had in terms of what this defense means and that willingness to put your life in danger, but to defend what you consider sacred. Okay, number 3. This may seem a bit of a contradiction to the first one, but hopefully you'll see that it's not. Number 3, the ultimate form of rights come through property rights. This is the highest thing. So when we talk about what right do you have, the highest form of rights for the founding was property. And they don't mean it in the way that we often mean it, that he who dies with the most toys wins. I'm sure you've seen bumper stickers that say that. That is not at all what they meant. What they meant was, as we talked about the other day, they meant that if you have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, your property is yourself. You own yourself. And that means that you must take responsibility for your decisions. You absolutely have to. You can't pass it off to somebody else. You can't make excuses. You can't blame a poor upbringing. You can't blame poor parents. You can't blame society. You can only blame yourself because you have not used your property well, meaning yourself. And that property is not just, here's Brad, and here's my book. I own the book. It's true, I do own that book. But it's much more about this. What do I do with this? What words do I say? What actions do I take? What choices do I make? That's what they mean by property. And that's why you can only be free, truly free, if you know how to govern yourself, because you're making choices every minute of every day. So property is critical. And then finally, 4, the easiest one of these, I think, and what we generally think of when we think of a republic, power has to be decentralized. So when we look at a governmental structure or we look at society, we recognize that even among the virtuous, there will be corruption and temptation, because even the virtuous are fallen. So what we have to do is create a society that does not worship power, but instead recognizes that power has to be diffuse. And what we do as Americans, and we do this extremely well, we form communities, as we've talked about. Right? We form communities, and we exercise our authority generally within the communities to which we belong. So those communities can be at many different levels. We could be talking about family or school or church. We could be talking about voluntary associations, but those communities really become critical. So I wanted us to read, and if someone else would volunteer to read, I wanted us to look at one of what are called the organic documents in American history. And there are 4 organic documents. So the organic documents, and by organic we mean that they're rooted in the common law. So the first of the organic documents is the Declaration of Independence. The second one is the Articles of Confederation. The third is the Northwest Ordinance. And the fourth is the Constitution. So those 4 documents, the Declaration, Articles of Confederation, Northwest Ordinance, and the Constitution, are our organic laws. They are the foundation of all constitutional understanding. Now, among those laws, the one that is probably least understood is the one that we have here on page 137 and on, what is called the Northwest Ordinance. And the Northwest Ordinance, we're going to jump forward a little bit. So obviously the Declaration is signed in July and August of 1776. We're now jumping forward to the summer of 1787, which is also the same summer, of course, that we have the Constitution being written. But the Northwest Ordinance is one of these laws that's passed by Congress that receives a unanimous vote. So under the Articles of Confederation, for something to become effective, it has to receive 13 out of 13 votes. That means everybody has to agree to it, and it very rarely happened. But one of the places where they did agree to it was in the Northwest Ordinance. And this was passed on July 13th of 1787. So again, the exact same summer that the Constitution is being written, but they're being written in different places. This, what we have here in front of us, the Northwest Ordinance, that is being written where our government is at that point, and our government is in New York. It's in Philadelphia, not our government, where you have this meeting going on, the Constitutional Convention. So we've really got, in many ways, in 1787, we've got 2 foundings going on at once. One that's going to create the Northwest Ordinance, and the other that's going to write the Declaration. So one of the things that we know with the Northwest Ordinance, not only was it passed unanimously, it was also passed without debate, which is interesting. That Congress did not go overboard at all. In fact, quite the opposite in getting this thing passed. Everybody agreed to it. And the moment the U.S. Constitution went into effect, the very first thing the new government under the U.S. Constitution did was reaffirm and ratify the Northwest Ordinance as the founding document of the American Republic. So for us in particular, this is really, really important at Hillsdale because, of course, it's one of the first great historians at Hillsdale. We're going to go visit his grave later on in this semester. He's just buried right up here. A guy named Ransom Dunn, who was the founder of the Republican Party in 1854. And when he founds the Republican Party, he takes the name Republican because they're living out what the Northwest Ordinance says. So we can't get more intimate in terms of national history and Hillsdale history than looking at this document. Right? This is a critical document for us, not just as Hillsdalians, but as Americans as well. So if someone would want to read, I would really appreciate it, starting on page 141 and going, Devin, thank you, and going through the articles that we have here.
Be it ordained by the United States in Congress assembled that the said territory for the purposes of temporary government be one district, subject, however, to be divided into...
Devin, go to 141, if you don't mind, and see Article the First. Let's start there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, gotcha. Thank you.
Article the First, no person demeaning himself in a peaceable and orderly manner shall ever be molested on account of his mode of worship or religious sentiments in the said territory.
Yeah, keep going.
Oh.
Thanks.
The inhabitants, Article the Second, the inhabitants of the said territory shall always be entitled to the benefits of the writ of habeas corpus and of the trial by jury, of the proportionate representation of the people in the legislature, and of judicial proceedings according to the course of the common law. All persons shall be bailable unless for capital offenses, where the proof shall be evident or the presumption great. All fines shall be moderate, and no cruel or unusual punishment shall be inflicted. No man shall be deprived of his liberty or property, but by the judgment of his peers, or the law of the land. And should the public exigencies make it necessary for the common preservation to take any person's property, or to demand his particular services, full compensation shall be made for the same. And in the just preservation of rights and property, it is understood and declared that no law ought ever to be made to have force in the said territory, that shall in any manner whatever interfere with or affect private contracts, or engage bona fide and without fraud previously formed. Article the Third, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. The utmost good faith shall always be observed towards the Indians. Their lands and their property shall never be taken from them without their consent. And in their property, rights, and liberty, they never shall be invaded or disturbed, unless in just and lawful wars authorized by Congress. But laws founded in justice and humanity shall from time to time be made for preventing wrongs being done to them, and for preserving peace and friendship with them.
Okay, let's stop there. Thanks, Devin. Nice reading. So I want you to break this down and kind of figure out what's happening here. We're trying to create in the Northwest Territory, and I'll explain what that is. We're trying to create an ideal of how we could govern ourselves and live with one another. So the Declaration is what it is. It is a declaratory statement. But that's one thing to complain about what the king has done wrong. It's a very different thing than to make your own republic actually work. So we've succeeded, we've defeated the British, we're independent, we have to make our own government work. And how are we going to do that? We already have 13 states that have 13 histories, right? Each one of those states has its own history. We've talked about at least four of the backgrounds of those states. Now we get into this new thing where they're all unified, but the entire history of the country will be in its future. That is, to understand America, you have to understand what westward expansion will mean. Westward expansion will become everything. It is the history of America because we have to expand beyond the 13 states, and then we have to decide what to do with that land that is there. So here we are in Michigan, and what the Northwest Ordinance tried to define, and did so beautifully, it did more than try, it did, for the most part, work. The Northwest Ordinance was to govern all this territory that was north and west of the Ohio River. So we've got the Ohio River that separates Indiana from Kentucky. That river, everything north and west of that, that'll be Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, and Wisconsin, and just a tiny bit of Minnesota, right? Very tiny bit of Minnesota. But essentially there are going to be 5 states that come out of this. And because this is the future, because this is where America is going, we have to figure out, what does that mean then? How do you actually make a republic work? And so we're given these 6 articles. Devin just read the first 3. We're given these 6 articles. And what can we say? And they're important in the way they go. And remember, no debate, unanimous vote for this. Number 1, right, Article the 1st, you have complete freedom of religion, as long as you don't harm another person. That's after everything we've talked about, this should be one of those things where we all drop our jaws. This is incredible. After all the bigotry that we saw in colonial America, after all the horrors of religious division and religious persecution and hatred in colonial America, we're now saying, look, in this new territory in the American West, when you go west, you're going to carry with you all kinds of preconceived ideas. So are they, and so are they, and so are they. And you have to be able to allow for a true toleration to work for you all to get along. You don't all have to be Presbyterian. You don't all have to be Jewish. You don't all have to be Catholic. You don't have to be any one thing. You can be many, many, many things and still get along with one another. And that is a profound statement of religious toleration, the kind of thing that we wish America had been, but was not until this point. It was not until the Revolution. And this is where maybe the Revolution is its most radical and revolutionary, that it can take down the religious bigotry that had existed so strongly and basically set it aside. And people are willing to allow that to happen, not without problems. There are always going to be problems. There's still problems to this day. There will always be problems. That is a given. But given those problems, how do you make this thing work? Well, we do it by basically saying, leave everybody alone. Let them do their thing. And you do your thing, and don't allow your thing to interfere with theirs. And then it should work. All right, this is how we can have competing communities. And there can be healthy competition. But it doesn't mean when you lose, you go blow up the other side. Right? You actually allow them to exist and keep it going. And that is one of the great achievements of America. And then we have Article 2. One of the most radical statements we'll ever see in American history. At the very beginning, pretty normal. When we say, and Devin, as he read, the inhabitants of the said territory shall always be entitled to the benefits of the writ of habeas corpus, to a trial by jury. What are they saying? What exists here in America? Devin, go ahead.
Due process.
Yeah, common law. The same kind of law that has governed England since before Christianity arrived is now our law. This whole tradition, the Magna Carta, everything, that's our law now. Doesn't matter it happened across the ocean. It happened to Englishmen. We're the true Englishmen now as Americans. We will continue that statement. And so there's no radical revision of the law code. Everything that the Pilgrims brought with them to Plymouth Rock, we're now taking to Hillsdale, Michigan. And that will keep going. And every person born on American soil, whether they speak English or not, every person is entitled to common law and all of its benefits. Every one of us has the right to be presumed innocent until the government proves us guilty. The presumption cannot be the other way. Again, there are failings. We see police brutality. We know that the police go hog wild when they're using searches and seizures in ways that I think would make our constitutional forefathers very, very upset. We're going to see abuses. But overall, most of us are going to be treated properly in terms of understanding that the guilt is not presumed, the innocence is. It's the way our whole court of law works, even when there are failings. And then we get to the really radical part. And this is the part that I have to stress for all of us, myself included. But when we're trying to define what does it mean to live in a republic and what does it mean to be an American, to me, this is the central idea that we see. And it's at the bottom of Article 2. So if you jump down to line 31, there on page 141, and in the just preservation of rights and property, it is understood and declared that no law, now think about that, there are no exceptions, there's no room to kind of argue on this, no law ought ever be made or have force in the said territory that shall in any manner whatsoever interfere with or affect private contracts or engagements unless fraud has been discovered. So, whatever I want to do, if I want to form a family, not one of you have the right to stop me unless there's fraud. If I want to raise my children in the way that I see fit and there's no fraud, you have no ability to stop me. If Grace and I start a business that you don't particularly like, tough. As long as what we've created is something that has no fraud and is not violent, you have no right to interfere with it. So you guys are, and I'm too young too, but in the 1970s, federal government told Hillsdale College we had to accept federal money and we had to abide by all kinds of federal laws. And Hillsdale's response was to look right here and to say our original charter comes from the Northwest Ordinance, and it says right there that private contracts and engagements are completely legitimate unless there's fraud. And Larry Arnn has used this to this day when he's been threatened with things, and he said the federal government says you have to do this and this and this, and what does Larry Arnn say? He says we got there before the federal government did. You're now believing in the things we believed in, but we were there first and we sacrificed for it. And he's absolutely right about this. This means that any business, any church, any family, any sorority, any fraternity, any private association we want to create, we have the right to do it. And nobody can interfere with that. State of Michigan can't tell us we can't do it. Federal government can't tell us we can't do it. This says if you form an association, it's totally yours, and it is absolutely protected from the scourge of politics. That's it. There are things that are apolitical, that politics simply cannot interfere with, and that's what this says here. And that's stunning. Even in the Bill of Rights, we don't see anything this radical as what we see here. So what are we as Americans? And I would argue this, and I will argue this for the next many weeks. You guys will be tired of hearing it. But we are a people who associate with one another. That's what we do. And think about this. Think about what happens in the world. Okay? If there is a tsunami somewhere, now, second time we've used that example, right? Let's say there's a tsunami in Thailand. Who in this room expects the New Zealanders all to show up on the shore of Thailand and take care of them? New Zealanders are great people. Australians, right? It's great people. Who goes? It's always Americans who show up first, everywhere in the world. Why? It's not the government. It's the Red Cross. It's a variety. The Mennonite Aid Association, the Lutheran Aid Association, Doctors Without Borders. This is what we do. We're amazing at it. And we're better than anybody in the world, partly because nobody else does it. We do it. We are the single most charitable people who have ever existed on the face of the earth when you just look at what we've given to other people. And that's part of this tradition of let us take care of this. Let us do this. Right? And we're good at it. We're really good. Okay, then we get to Article 3, and things start getting a little dicier. Suddenly we have this great, and it is beautiful, it's wonderful, we have this great philosophical statement about the Indians. What do we say? We will treat them like we treat everybody else. We will recognize them in their property. We will never invade or steal from the American Indians. Okay, we can all kind of laugh at that in a tragic kind of way. But if you're in New York in the summer of 1787 writing this document, what do you see the Indians as? What are they? Now remember, the West is the future. The West is history for America. So what are they? Got this native population everywhere. What do they represent? These Hitler's children? Do whatever we want and wipe them out because they're evil? What's the argument here?
Well, typically,
thanks, Devin.
from a bunch of letters, mainly between Madison and Jefferson, they looked at it as kind of like the closest thing to an actual state of nature.
Yeah. And so these Indians live in a state of nature. Right? They live in a state of nature, and therefore we call them noble savages. Right? It's not a derogatory term originally. Right? It's meant to be just someone who is not under law in the way that we think of it. And yet, how do we have to treat them? as though they are under law. In other words, what is the American Indian in the mind of the founding? They're future citizens of the United States. And that's why they have to be treated with that kind of justness and respect. Now, it never plays out that way, for the most part. I mean, we treat a few tribes well, but not many. Yeah, so we have a few alliances that are good, but most fall apart. And we see that the history doesn't go that way, but I want you to just think about the ideal possibilities. The American Indians are not our enemies. They're our brethren who are not as civilized as we are. Now, that's got all kind of snobbish implications, no question. But at the same time, it's very much a part of the thinking of who and what they are. We just have to give the Indians a little bit more time to civilize, and then we can live in harmony together. We can have a peaceful society with one another. Part of the problem is, of course, we expand far faster than we ever expect to. So we're moving so quickly into Indian territory that the dangers and the problems are just exacerbated. Okay, so I want to point out one last thing, and we'll call it a day, and that is jump to Article 6. And notice what we have here when we're talking about the future. What do we have with Article 6? There shall be neither slavery nor involuntary servitude in the said territory otherwise than in the punishment of crimes. Slavery is not to be a part of the West. It can exist where it now exists because we have no power to take it down. But where we have the power to deal with it, we end it now. It's over. Right? And when the Republican Party is founded in 1854 by Hillsdale, when it's founded at that point, its purpose is exactly this: to expand into the West, but not to allow slavery to extend into the territories. That's, as far as political parties go, that's a pretty good one. It's a really good one. That's not, you scratch my back and I'll scratch your back. That actually stands for something. And it's something we should be proud of. It's an amazing thing. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a great weekend. For Monday, I would like you to read the next couple of documents. So I'm sure you guys have all read this for other classes at Hillsdale, but I would like you to read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. All right? Good. Thanks, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I've got a couple of housekeeping things really quickly, and I hope you're all okay with these. First one, you don't really have much choice. Don't forget your papers due today. And I just don't, as long as you send it to me by midnight tonight, I assume you have better things to do on a Friday evening, but just get it to me, and I won't even be checking until tomorrow morning. But do send it to me as a PDF, please. And hopefully I can start grading those, actually, probably tomorrow. I'm hoping to. Yeah, Viga.
Sorry, I just want to confirm. So if we turn it past 6 p.m., we won't have any points deducted?
Oh, no, not at all.
Oh, okay.
No, not at all. Yeah, just as long, try and send it tonight, right?
Okay, yeah.
So I would appreciate it. Okay, so the second thing, and this is where I need your permission, and I hope it's fine with all of you. I would like to move the test from this coming Friday to the following Wednesday. So it was going to be on Valentine's Day, and then it'll be on the, I think it's the 19th. Is that right, February 19th? So obviously, oh, Paul, that's okay. That was, you would have no idea. For some reason, that door's locking on the inside. So we had to knock in the previous class. We had to bang to have people come get us out. So that's okay. Well, you would not have known that.
I didn't shut it.
It's okay. We'll see. It makes it exciting. Come on, this is great. We'll see. Oh, well, it's shut behind you. How's that? It's the force.
It's the force.
No, it's fine. We got it. But yeah, I had to bang. Were any of you out there in the hall? I was sitting there banging.
That's so funny.
Okay, so anyway, make sure that you're ready for that exam. So my point that I want to make about this is obviously I'm the one who changed the exam time. So if for whatever reason that doesn't work for you, I will do whatever we need to do to make it work. So it sounds like, at least the way you were reacting, it sounds like most of you are okay with it. But if you're not for whatever reason, email me and we'll figure something out. Okay, but do email me soon so we can get that figured out. But again, thanks for being willing to and flexible on that. That's great. I'm actually part of the reason I'm going to be out of town I found out on that Wednesday, so I thought that'd probably be a good time to do it. So I'm not going to be lecturing that day. So it'll probably be my wife who will proctor it, but I'll let you know. We'll get all that figured out. And I will get you a study guide. Hopefully I'll get a study guide to you today or tomorrow. So I'll make that a priority. Okay, third thing is for Monday then, I would like you to read, and I assume at Hillsdale you've done this already, but I would like you to read the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So, and we'll go over that. But I'd like to start today, so that's it for the housekeeping. Unless anybody has any questions about the paper, formatting, test, anything. Everyone okay? Good. You guys are easy. Okay, and the sun is out. I mean, it's just glorious, isn't it? It's so nice to have the sun. I can deal with cold. I love cold, but I just hate gray. Man, it just gets so tiring. Okay, I would like us all, if you guys don't mind, let's all turn to this document two documents we have right after the Declaration of Independence on page 135. And if someone would volunteer to read this broadside here that we have, I would appreciate it. So, Paul, that'd be great. Thank you. So just the fellow countrymen, it's page 135.